Did I ever tell you my story of having dinner with Tom Cruise? And
no, please do.
Oh man, this is 10 years ago or something. And we were having dinner and I was visiting. It was right after Krasinski and I had written Promised Land. And Emily was shooting that movie, Edge of Tomorrow, with Tom in London. Excellent movie. Doug Liman movie. It's really good.
Great one.
And we went over there and we all went out to dinner. And and it was right after Tom had done the skit where the scene where he ran outside the building in that Mission Impossible. Remember the one where he runs sideways around the tallest building in the world? So I go, dude, what happened? Like, how did that come to pass? And he goes, well, I mean, I've been dreaming of that stunt for 15 years. And he starts to tell me the story. He goes, so I go to the safety guy and I go, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to attach myself, to a cable, and I'm going to run around the outside of the building, about 1,500 feet up or whatever it was. And he goes, safety guy looks at the gag. He goes, no, it's too dangerous. So I get a new safety guy. I'm like, wait a minute, stop, hang on. That's how your mind works. Like, the safety guy says it's too dangerous, so we get another safety guy. I'm like, that's where I'm like, see, you win. I tap out right there when the safety guy says it's too dangerous. I'm like, well, he probably knows because you're a one
opinion guy.
Yeah, exactly. I only need to hear that once. But he's just built differently, And I mean, he really is at this point, one of the great stuntmen in the world.
Right.
When you look at the stuff that he's done, it's incredible. Here's a good story for you that Scorsese told me when we were making The Departed. He told me a story about when he made I brought up The King of Comedy, which is one of my favorites of his.
That's an all-time most polarizing movie.
Right. And he goes, the first story that jumped to mind for him was it was New Year's Eve. And he goes, I was putting on a tuxedo. I was going out to a New Year's Eve party. It was a black tie party. And he goes, and I was trying to tie my bow tie in the mirror. And the television was on. And back then it's, 3 channels, obviously. And whatever channel he's on, the entertainment reporter goes, and the competition for the worst movie of the year is over. The King of Comedy, and Marty said he just tied his bow tie and he sat and he just looked at himself in the mirror and then untied the bow tie. Took it up, took the jacket out, that was it. He wasn't going anywhere. He went and he just crawled into and went to sleep. And that movie's brilliant, right? And it's one of his great movies. But it sometimes you can get laid low by these things.
I have a few different Shining stories that I love. I don't know how much time we have, but
we have a lot of time. What do you mean? How do you have Shining stories? You weren't in The Shining.
No, but I worked with the production designer who the last film he did was The Talented Mr. Ripley, and he was Kubrick's guy, and he told me this great story about when he was designing that movie. Stanley Kubrick had a scale model of the Overlook. Is it the Overlook Hotel?
Yeah.
The Overlook Hotel in their production office. And they would stand around, and this is like 1978 or 9. And he would set these lights on, to shoot this little hotel. He would set miniature lights and he would get them. He would take hours doing this while his production heads were standing around. And then he'd take a photograph. And then he'd hand it to an assistant who would go and run off. And this is before 1 hour photo. He'd go run off and develop it and come back with an 8x10. And Kubrick would look at it for about 5 minutes. And then he'd put it down and he'd go back and he'd start setting the lights. And this is Roy Walker telling me this story. And the legendary guy. And this process would go on for days. But what Roy said was, what was incredible was when you were on the set, Kubrick had come up with some algorithm by which he could kind of transpose the numbers of the lights. So he would he would set it just how he wanted, and then he would record what each light was at. He knew his sources were coming from exactly the same place in the big world when he did it. And he came up with this algorithm by which he could just go, and he had all the things set, and he would just set the lights up. And Roy said you could hold the 8x10, stand in the hallway, hold the 8x10 in front of your face and pull it away. And you would see the exact same thing that he'd shot on the miniature model, which is just like the level of it just artistry / insanity and obsession is just so beautiful. I've heard like David Fincher, who's Soderbergh's best friend. So I've done 8 movies with Soderbergh, but I have never worked with Fincher. But Ben worked with Fincher. Affleck did, and
for Gone Girl.
Yes, and so I went down and visited the set one day, and what I've heard from both Steven and from Ben, having worked with him, is it's Fincher is has that Kubrick thing, like he can't unsee what he sees.
Yeah.
Right. And so I sat behind him one day while he was directing, and it was this scene where Ben and Rosamund Pike walk into this bookstore. And so the camera was down the aisle of books. So it sees them down the aisle, open the door, come in. And then as they walk down, the camera dollies with them at the far end of the bookstore and walks down. And then they eventually enter an aisle. The camera stops. They enter up the aisle towards the camera, and they end up kissing each other in this section of the bookstore. So it's like probably a 90-second shot while they're talking. And when the camera rolled, like Fincher's got this big monitor in front of him with it's everything is everything is exactly as it's going to appear in the movie, and he's set all these levels himself, and he's sitting there, and I'm behind him, and I've got headphones on so I can hear the scene, and he calls action. They call background, which is for the extras, the people in the bookstore, and then they call action. So when he calls background and then action, a background actor walks across the frame. All right. Then Ben and Rosamund enter the bookstore, and the scene's about to start. But Fincher is already monologuing. He's going, "Who the fuck walks like that?" And it's the background artist it just instantly caught his eye. He goes, "I mean, what the fuck was that? What the fuck? Who the fuck walks like that? Nobody walks like that." Now Ben and Rosamund are on the other side of this bookstore, and they're doing the scene, but Fincher's just still talking about this, and I'm sitting here going like, "Oh my God, they're definitely going to do the scene again."
Yeah.
Like this take is completely...
It's shot.
It's just shot. And so they get through the whole scene. They're acting their hearts out. It's great, but it doesn't matter because the scene ended before it began. And Fincher goes, "Cut," and he takes the headphones off. He's like, "I mean, what the fuck was that?" And he looks at me. Now I know what he's talking about. The background artist was told to go from point A to point B, and they were not thinking about anything other than going from point A to point B.
Like a zombie.
And it looked ridiculous. He's not wrong, but it's just not worth... It's like, okay, just make a note of that. But it just ruined the whole thing for him. And we're sitting there, and as we're talking, a makeup artist comes on because Rosamund's still in the frame, and she's going to like powder her forehead or whatever. She comes on, and David goes, "I mean, that's how you walk." Like, because she had a place to go. She had a reason to go there, right? And so she's not thinking about walking. She's thinking about, I gotta do my touch-up. I only have about 10 seconds. I got to get out. We got to do the scene again. So I think, and I think for people like that, it's almost like a curse, Like I remember when he made, with the famous Swedish books, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Right.
And I asked Steven, the movie was going to come out within a month. And I was like, how was it? I read the books. I'm dying to know. I mean, and Steven goes, "I haven't seen it yet." I'm like, "What are you talking about? He hasn't shown it to you yet? Like, of all people?" And he goes, "No, I literally think there's like a monitor, a computer screen in one shot in the background. And he's still trying to set the level of that." Like, he goes, he can't unsee what he sees, and that's the genius, right?